Some memories don't dull, they just change color. If you've ever driven long enough through the night, you know the feeling. The road stops being a way to get somewhere and starts feeling like a place with its own rules. Yellow lines unspooling, asphalt whispering, your breath a little too loud in the cabin. I'm not here to sell you monsters or tidy explanations. The three people you're about to hear from aren't storytellers. They're ordinary drivers who still live with the things they can't put down. They aren't sure what they saw. They are very certain how it felt. And once the engine cut and the lights were off, the sounds didn't exactly stop. You can decide what fits inside the lines. My name is Dan Mercer. I'm 41, and I teach high school chemistry in Boise, Idaho. This happened in late winter of 2011, somewhere between Rawlins and Lander, Wyoming, when you can't swear if the snow flurry is light or if your eyes are just tired. It was after midnight, closer to 3 when all this was over. I had a quarter tank, lukewarm gas station coffee cooling in the cup holder, and a true crime podcast murmur low enough to feel like company, but not enough to make me miss an exit. The wind had that dry hiss that Wyoming keeps tucked under its coat. I remember thinking about lesson plans, about stoichiometry, about nothing that mattered. The first off note was small. I passed a yellow diamond sign, crosswinds, an arrow like a push of air. Then, 2 minutes later, the same sign again, at the same angle, as if someone copy-pasted a stretch of road. I told myself I was looping thoughts, and the mind likes loops. My odometer slid into a neat palindrome, 14241, right as the NOAA chime cut through the podcast, a sharp two-tone that made me flinch. I never turn on the weather feature. I don't know how to. The screen was dark. I fiddled with the dial anyway. The cabin smelled suddenly like hot dust, the way a baseboard heater smells the first time you kick it on in November, even though I had the coolant set low and the outside temperature was barely 20. When the orange detour placards appeared, I didn't argue. The wind had been nudging the car, and the shuffle of white over the asphalt was thick enough to make the edges of the world feel close. The arrows pushed me onto a smaller road, then a smaller one, until the highway dropped away in my rear view, and I was alone with a ribbon of blacktop in a white field. Then I saw the green dinosaur, the Sinclair logo, lit up like it was the only thing that remembered color. The station sat in a wind-scoured lot, the kind of square building you'd sketch if someone said gas station and you had 30 seconds. The bulbs over the pumps were fat and warm and didn't flicker. My stomach dropped when I realized the pump faces were the old mechanical rollers. I almost smiled like, oh, a kitschy thing, a retro spot. The smile didn't land. Inside, the warmth felt tired, like air that had been warmed and warmed over all winter. The clock over the counter was analog, white face, black hands. The second hand ticked. It said 113. It would always say 113. Behind the counter stood a man whose age I couldn't place, the face a little too smooth, hair the color of dishwater, paper name tag that just said, attendant. He didn't look up. The convex mirror above him sucked in the room and bulged it back out, and for a half second my stomach went wrong because the mirror showed me at the register even though I was still a few steps away. Not a reflection, more like a delayed frame. Cash only, the man said when I reached for my card, not glancing up, not blinking. He sounded like someone reading a line he'd said so many times it polished flat. I carry cash because I teach, and cash is useful for donuts on quiz days. I peeled off a 20 and a 5, hands shaking more than I thought they should. The register keys clacked, physical keys, and the drawer stuck, then opened with a sigh of springs. When I stepped back out under the canopy, the wind hit my teeth. The pump nozzle was the old heavy kind, with a trigger action you can feel in your forearm. Fill to the line, I heard, right by my left ear, soft, and so close that the hairs inside my ear tickled. It wasn't the way the attendant sounded. It was my father, dead 6 years by then, in the voice he used when he showed me how not to round off with gas, how to listen for the first click. I froze. I wasn't scared like fake scared. I was placed. Like someone had put me in a box that was only the exact size of me. I didn't turn. I listened to the pump thunk, to the slow gulp of the fuel. My breath fogged the driver's side window, and then I saw it. The fog wasn't a smear, but shaped like a rounded triangle. 3 ovals where someone's nose and mouth would have pressed from inside the car. The passenger seat, empty, carried a dent, just enough to catch the angle of the overhead light and turn the fabric dark. The seatbelt lay twisted, the way it does when someone unbuckles in a hurry. I clicked it back in to square it up without meaning to. It didn't feel like I wanted to do that. It felt like I had to obey the same way you signal before turning, even when no one's there. The pump kicked off. I paid for $26.14. The attendant handed me a receipt with that thermal paper feel. The ink was a little too dark, like the first receipt after replacing a roll. It read, March 19, 1987, 1:13 a.m. The address line blank, except for Sinclair. The phone number had 7 digits and no area code. I put the slip into my wallet, not the glove box, because I didn't trust the car. When I pulled out, the orange placards pointed me back in a lazy Z until I rejoined what had to be 287. The wind sounded like it had chewed the corners off itself. The podcast voice was playing, but I wasn't listening. A mile, 2 miles, I checked my mirror again. The seat cushion had risen. The fog ovals were gone. I swallowed and tasted the thin bitterness you get before you throw up. I turned the radio to static just to clean my ears. The odometer was no longer a palindrome. The speedometer needle drifted like a tired eyelid. When I thought I had my guts back, I turned around. It's stupid, I know. The road was just road. The detour signs were not there. There were no posts in the gravel where a canopy should have been. A low hump of snow marked a spot where plows had heaped the winter's last storm. I pulled over anyway and let the wind take my body heat. The moon was somewhere. My dad used to say Wyoming moonlight makes everything look honest. I don't think he ever had a night like that. Weeks later, after I had convinced myself the brain pulls parlor tricks when it's lonely, I found the charge on my bank account, pending, $26.14, deleted merchant. It sat there for 3 days, then vanished like a transaction I meant to make and forgot. I called the number on the receipt because of course I did. A recording said the number wasn't in service. When I drove that corridor again in spring, I asked at a diner in Jeffrey City if there was an old Sinclair close by. The waitress said a Sinclair at the edge of town burned down decades ago. She didn't remember the year. I didn't push. I could feel her watching me not eat the rest of my pie. I still teach, but not the AP sections. It sounds silly. The load is lighter, but it isn't about workload. My attention has since been allergic to long stretches without a handhold. I don't drive at night unless I have to. I turned off the weather alert and stopped carrying the radio scanner my dad used to keep in his truck. It's too easy to hear something that sounds official and realize you're being led. The receipt lives in my glove box now, in a plastic sleeve, because I say I'll show it to someone. The ink has gone ghost. The date is a smear. The merchant line is blank. Only the time, 1:13, stays as black as the day it was printed. Some things don't fade on the schedule you expect. Highways make us obedient. We are trained to want the arrow more than the destination. If you've ever followed a single orange sign into a place you didn't mean to be, you know the bargain. A detour steals certainty one polite step at a time. You think you chose it. You think you can choose your way back. Then all you can do is keep the line and pretend you don't know you were redirected. Story 2. I'm Leticia Morales. I was 29 in November of 2019 when I drove the loneliest stretch of US 50 through Nevada because a therapist said a long road could iron a mind flat if you let it. I'd been an EMT in Austin and left after a call I didn't think broke me until it did. The desert promised flat words and cold air. I topped off the tank in Fallon, checked the thread of reflectors carrying east like a zipper, and told myself the stars were too bright to allow anything superstitious. It was after 2 in the morning, which is an hour that only belongs to people who work nights and people who don't want to go home. The frost made the windshield feel granular from the edges in. My playlist was the only private thing I had, and at 3 in the morning I let the songs I listened to at 14 wear out their ancient grooves. I'd stopped once to stretch and listen to the silence bleed, the kind of silence that isn't quiet. It's a pressure, like the sky is sitting on your chest politely. The hazard triangles were the first wrong thing. 3 bright orange reflectors set at textbook distances along the shoulder, farthest back, middle, close, like a driver's ed diagram for a breakdown. There wasn't a car, no skid, no steam. The triangles looked freshly unfolded, the creases still crisp. I slowed, the honor system of highway help making my hand hover over the turn signal. I didn't pull over. Guilt is a heavy jacket. I wear it right. The clock on my phone said 1:17. The clock on the dash said 2:41. Neither advanced when I watched them. They just disagreed. A man stepped into my beams from nothing I could see. Parka, hood up, no hat, no frost vapor from his mouth when he spoke, which he did with this exact cadence. Past Hickison. Just a bit. His hand was flat when he waved, like he was pressing me back into my seat from outside the glass. He didn't give a name when I asked. He didn't decline a ride. He just took the seat. He didn't blink much. He folded his hands. He looked ahead, but in the dash cam reflection, I swear he faced me, watching without turning. When I glanced at his face properly, my brain slid off. He wasn't blank. He was accurate in a way that the word is too lazy for. The radio, set to scan, landed on a voice reading numbers like coordinates using the exact two-tone cadence I'd heard 100 times on NOAA weather radio after hailstorms. North, west, decimals, pause, repeat. I pressed seek, dead air, scan the numbers again. I tried to make the numbers into something, an intersection, a milepost, a prayer. The metallic taste hit me then, a penny worn down on the tongue. It came and went with my breathing, like the air in the cabin was a different species than the air outside. I called him Sir once because that's how I was raised. He didn't answer to anything. He hummed instead, low, 4 notes that would have been nothing if they hadn't lined up with the seam-sealed rhythm of the tires and the scrape of the wiper. I recognized the tune a second later as the beginning of a bolero my father played when he cooked on Sundays. I got angry the way you do when grief notices you. I told myself someone once hummed everything. That's how melodies work. The odometer ticked backward. I kept my eyes on the road like a student. 6 miles slide off the count. I thought I'd misseen a flicker. It kept ruthlessly subtracting until it landed on an earlier number that made no sense for the time I'd spent. The reflectors on the right, the cat's eye studs you can see threading into the distance in certain parts of Nevada, brightened, multiplied. I would have sworn there had been 100 yards between each one earlier. Now they linked like a beaded chain. The seatbelt on the passenger side was latched. I hadn't heard the click. The buckle tongue lay under the strap as if a hand had slid it in and smoothed it down like a tie. "Right here," he said at an unmarked turnout, voice soft, instructive, like a flight attendant before a pointing gesture. I don't brake fast. I hate jolting the car. I slowed, as if obeying a sign. He set something on my dash with a ceremonial care that made my skin know it was colder outside than I had admitted. A motel key tag. the kind with the stamped aluminum fob. Elko, 1973. My last name Morales, scratched in by hand, but not the way I write. Deeper cuts, hesitant strokes, as if someone had been told to copy the letters without understanding them. I glanced down for half a second. The human half-second you give to a small new object that can't possibly hurt you. When I looked up, the passenger door was closed. I hadn't heard it open. The belt slithered back into its retainer slowly, like a tape measure rewinding. The cushion recovered as warmth left. Outside, there was frost vapor in the glow of my headlights, and a scuff of rubber where a boot heel might have pivoted. The hazard triangles I had passed were stacked on my trunk lid in a neat little tower. I didn't get out. I don't think I could have unlocked my fingers from the wheel if you asked me with money. I drove. I didn't check the mirror for a while. The clock on the phone still said 1:17. The dash still had 2:41. The song rolling into another didn't stick in my head. Past Hickison, just a bit, the radio numbers changed and I recognized the pattern enough to drop them a voice memo. At the next pullout, I forced myself to step onto the gravel, breath white, hands in my jacket, and I knocked the triangles off my trunk and put them in a line facing the shoulder. They looked so stupid and so perfectly correct there that I wanted to throw them into the sagebrush. I left them because that's not what you do. When I got to Ely, maybe 2 hours later, maybe 20 minutes, the clocks agreed again, like nothing had happened. The motel key tag sat on the dash where I couldn't ignore it. I tried to sleep in a room that smelled like old air conditioner and clean bleach. I dreamed of nothing, which was worse than dreaming of something. In the morning, I typed the numbers I'd recorded into Google Maps. They landed on a dry lake bed southeast of Eureka. I didn't go. I told myself a story about old survey markers, about shortwave radio bleed, about bored men with nothing kinder to do. It worked until a small envelope without a return address slid under my apartment door in Austin 2 weeks later. Inside was a Polaroid of a Chevy pickup buried to the hubs in white pan. No sky, no faces. On the cracked bumper, the same motel key tag dangled. There's a way a Polaroid looks when it's new, gloss stiff, ink still smelling faint. This was an old picture that felt fresher than it deserved. I quit the contract driving gigs. I finished nursing school like I'd promised myself I would. I took a hospice day shift and learned how quiet can be a kind of kindness. The 3 hazard triangles live in my trunk now, because of course I bought 3. Like you can keep a ghost at bay by copying its tools. Sometimes I wake with the taste of pennies and it's nothing at all. Sometimes I sit in my car after the day and hum 4 notes to see if the tires will catch them. My dashcam archives every mile without comment. When I play back that night, the ride is what rides are. Black ribbon, reflectors shining, nothing at all. Except there's a faint pressure mark in the passenger seat that never lifts, an indentation the fabric won't unlearn. If you tell me fabric does that sometimes, I'll agree, because agreeing is how you get through a day. The key tag lives in a drawer with my social security card. I don't touch it. That feels like the line. The road doesn't remember our faces. It remembers our weight. It keeps the heat of us longer than it should. If a passenger doesn't show up in the frames we trust, it doesn't mean they weren't there. Sometimes the only proof you're offered is what's missing when you stop driving. Story 3. My name is Aaron Kim. I'm 34 now, was 25 then, and when this happened I still thought of myself as a freelance sound engineer who just needed enough quiet to prove I had something to say with microphones. It was October of 2006, the window where New England smells like wood smoke and sweet rot, and my girlfriend at the time, Maya, had convinced me a foliage trip would feed the little documentary we were trying to make. We drove north from Newark in a high-mileage Subaru that sounded like a sewing machine and this calm, righteous belief that recording other people's landscapes could turn into our own work. The plan was simple. Sleep cheap, drive slow, pause when a place had a sound we wanted. Culverts, porch swings, the hiss of wind through sugar maples, and pin each location with a Polaroid so we could remember where the good walls of air were when we cut later. By the time the thing in me that passes for bravery was tested, it was somewhere between 4 and 6 in the morning, the hour when the world looks blue in the windshield and you don't know if the day will honor you with sun. We were in the upper Connecticut River Valley, sliding along the New Hampshire-Vermont line, drifting from 2-lane to gravel and back to 2-lane as the river hid and revealed itself like it had better things to do. The cabin smelled like old thermos coffee and wet leaves we'd tracked in. Maya was in the passenger seat with the recorder across her lap, the XY mics like little ears tipped toward the dash, the red light steady, letting the Subaru's soft noises purl into the card. We had an atlas opened on her knees, the kind with the plastic ring and the thick paper, because we didn't trust the GPS as far as we could throw it, which wasn't far. We used both anyway, like you use 2 hands even when one is stronger. I remember the first wrong thing came packaged as a kindness. The GPS chirped and rerouted without asking, drawing a new purple ribbon off the road we were on and toward the river. It put a name on the screen I didn't recognize. Pratt's Ferry Covered Bridge, 0.8 miles. The font was the same as every other time it had told me about a Dunkin' Donuts on a corner that didn't exist. The atlas had no bridge by that name, just a thin gray track ending at a blue braid. I said the name out loud because saying a thing sometimes makes it feel less like a dare. Maya shifted the map and frowned, but not with fear. "If it's an old bridge," she said, "it'll sound better than pavement." She was right. Wood reports a story back to you even when you don't deserve it. The road narrowed and leaned, and the river appeared at our right shoulder like a dark pane angled to catch dawn. There was a weight limit sign, white letters on black, right where a lane curved down toward a timber mouth. Weight limit 6 tons. The paint looked new, like it had just dried, the brush marks visible in a light we didn't have. A small bell sounded somewhere to our left. 1 ring, then 2 rings too close together, then nothing, as if someone who didn't know how to lead a church was practicing. The car filled with the smell you get when a bag of apples sits a little too long in a warm room, that sweet edge slipping toward vinegar. I checked the temperature gauge. Normal. The heater, still on low because the glass had a skin of fog, coughed once as if swallowing. We rolled onto the bridge. The tires found boards, and the world turned to meter. Thump, thump, thump. The resonance climbed up the steering column and through the soles of my shoes and into the little bones near my ear. It was satisfying for a heartbeat, like the car was playing a drum and we were the sticks, and the drum was older than any song we knew. Then the drum didn't stop where it should have. Covered bridges are short by design. This one stretched. Not in a way you could measure. If you asked me for feet, I'd fail. But in the way the air failed to finish a thought. The thumps narrowed and sped the way they do when you speed up, except I hadn't. My right foot felt glued, then featherlight, then unsure which position meant same speed. It got colder inside the car than outside. You know the way you can feel when the inside air is older? It was that, plus a quiet that is not the lack of noise, but the presence of something that muffles. My breath fogged. Maya's did too. Outside, in the gap of wood where you can sometimes see river, there was no fog. The sound of the tires, which I had been loving a second ago, showed me where my fear lived. Under the thump was a soft tick, like fingernails tapping a tabletop in another room. The recorder's levels didn't make sense. Peaks where there shouldn't be, a low rumble like a train when we were on a bridge that couldn't carry rail. A small figure stood at the far mouth where the bridge let the morning through, a child in a yellow slicker, hood up, face shadowed by the round of the fabric. I let the gas off and let the car coast, and the thump-thump slowed into something like breathing. The child lifted an arm exactly once, not a wave, a raise, elbow a little stiff, like a conductor preparing to count. I didn't stop. I was too ashamed later to admit I didn't stop, even though in my gut I knew stopping would have been a ritual I wasn't trained for. The Polaroid camera on Maya's lap, which she hadn't primed or touched, whirred and spit a print, the mechanism loud in the cold quiet. The two of us looked at it like people look at lottery tickets they didn't buy but still hope to win from proximity. It developed fast, darker at the edges, the center coming out like an image arriving from behind the paper. Me and Maya in the front seats, older by a decade, her hair shorter, my jaw a little heavier, and in the rear window, fog bead circles, where a small face would have been if a small face had been pressed there. We left the far mouth and the world stepped down in volume. The road that met us looked like it belonged to a different morning than the one we had just borrowed. A little store sat at a three-way with a gas sign that read $1.21 in numbers that had somehow kept their red even as they faded in the corners. A newspaper box leaned near the door with a headline whose date might have been 199-, but the last digit didn't hold long enough for my eyes to agree. A flood recovery story in big font with smaller words turned to rain. A man in a cap and a woman with a scarf hunched over coffees at a window booth and didn't move while we drifted by at 5 miles per hour like we had a right to inspect their time. The bell rang twice again from somewhere I couldn't place. If there's a moment you could blame us for, it's this one. We looped to cross back. The road cooperated like a stagehand. We could see the bridge's entrance. We couldn't reach it. A curtain of ivy, dead leaves woven into green, draped from timber to timber, as if a hand had drawn a line and nature obeyed. If I'd had a machete, which I didn't and never will, I could have tried to cut through. The brush had found places to root where there was no dirt. The road in front of the ivy had that silted look that comes when tires have not pressed for more years than your life has known. The GPS said Pratt's Ferry covered bridge, 0.0 miles. The atlas still showed nothing. I felt the car roll backward an inch like the earth itself had declined. There was a farmhouse across the road, the kind that has outbuildings whose spaces you can't name from the car. The porch light blinked. 3 quick, 1 long, 3 quick, pause, 3 quick, 1 long, 3 quick. It made no sense as a signal I knew, and made too much sense as a signal that had nothing to do with me. An elderly man sat on the porch swing, jacket on, hat brim low. He didn't look at us when I nosed the car in and rolled down the window to ask if there was another way across. He said, in a voice like someone reading a note off a refrigerator, "The bridge washed away in '79. You can't cross there." I tried to ask if he meant the flood the paper had maybe gestured at. He said again, same cadence, same pickups and drops. "The bridge washed away in '79. You can't cross there." And the porch light fell into its pattern like it had nothing else in its vocabulary. Maya reached for my arm. Her nails didn't dig. She was gentler with me than I deserved. When I turned us around, the road felt shorter than it had any right to be. The recorder caught the car's cabin like it was a room, which is an engineer's comfort and a person's nightmare. I listened, as I drove, to the last 30 seconds of what we'd captured. Under the tire slur and the heater fan and Maya's breath, there was a third person. Not a voice like a neighbor, a voice like a counting device, like someone had turned numbers into a tone. 6, then 5, then 4, held just long enough to know that the next would be 3. At 2, the hair on my arms did the cliché thing, and I'm sorry to say I'm not better than clichés when my animal body is being told something. At 1, the recording clicked. Not a glitch, but the sound a cassette deck makes when you tap stop with your thumb. And something outside the car let go. Dawn arrived without the gradients we pretend to understand. The trees went from paper to colored pencil. The fog on the river lifted like someone rolled a scrim. In the rear view, we saw the bridge not the way we had, but the way a calendar would have liked it. A dark shape over water, no ivy, the mouth untroubled by yellow. The recorder warbled and then kept, and I shut it off because I didn't want to hear who would count next. We drove until the Subaru hiccuped the way it does when it wants a break. We pulled into a turnout that existed on the atlas and on the GPS and in the dirt. I touched the Polaroid, the one that had printed itself without being told, and the back was warm, as if it had been under a lamp. We didn't talk. Maya held it in two hands and stared, not at the child's ghost-like bead circles, but at the older version of herself, like getting ahead of your own face would trap you behind it forever. I wanted to be useful. All I could do was make coffee with water that tasted like the inside of a coil. We went home in a way that had nothing to do with a line on a map and everything to do with making the line shorter where it hurt least. For months after, Google would show a little gray bridge icon where the covered bridge should have been, then remove it, then show it again. We would joke in the mean way people joke to stay honest. Oh look, history's arguing with itself, and feel sick 2 beats later. I mailed a copy of the Polaroid to the Town Historical Society with a careful note asking not for an explanation but for a scrapbook reference because I thought making it research would make it less personal. It came back in my own envelope with my own stamp and a typed note inside. Actual type, the kind that dents. No such bridge now. Please stop. I told myself the now was a kindness. It didn't feel like one. Maya left a few months after that. It wasn't because of a bridge. It was because of the person I turned into when wood knocked under tires. I couldn't sleep in our apartment if I could hear anyone walking in the unit above us, the floorboards counting their steps like a metronome, and the world in our place turned to a series of corrections. She needed room for a life that did not require tiptoeing across her own floor to avoid my stomach turning. That's fair. I moved to a building with concrete between floors and took fewer on-location jobs, because studios let me tell sound where to go and streets do not. I shifted to mastering, where the work is what the word says. The last hand, the polish, the listening for the click before it clicks. I stopped taking gigs in old theaters because the lip of the stage made my legs feel hollow. I stopped driving over wood if I didn't have to. In the city, that looks like avoiding maybe 3 streets. In my mind, it looks like someone drawing a highlighter over every plank. People like to say rivers carve their own paths, and that feels like something you can't argue with until you realize you don't know how quickly a river can decide it's done with one direction. On quiet mornings when the traffic filters high and thin through my window and the air in my place holds still, I can hear boards, fresh, then swollen, then shrink back, lifting and settling under a weight that isn't mine. I tell myself it's radiator heat. I tell myself that wood moves on its own schedule and that schedule doesn't require me. I don't open the envelope with the returned note or the second Polaroid. It lives in a drawer that sticks a little the way wooden drawers do. I want to believe some stuck things are boring. I practice believing boring things. I fail in increments. You can say roads are just stretches of surface between locations you already know by name, and most days you're right. But every mile has its own gravity. Ask Dan, and he'll keep his hands flat on the wheel and tell you about a detour that taught him obedience long after the cones were gone. Ask Letitia, and she'll stare at the passenger seat like she's waiting for the fabric to exhale. Ask me, and I will try not to turn the tire noise under your feet into a measurement of what has been lost and what is so close to finding you that you'll taste copper before you taste air. The part nobody warns you about is how ordinary it is. The orange arrow that looks official enough to lend your life direction for 2 turns. The clean triangles on a shoulder that feel like a courtesy. A bridge with a sign that promises 6 tons, like, that's what matters. It's not the spectacle that hurts, it's the paperwork. The receipts that won't fade the way they should. The key tag that belongs to a room you've never stayed in. The Polaroid that prints a future no camera has the right to anticipate. And then the small bureaucracies of consequence, the jobs you say no to, the routes you won't take, the person you are not because you can't sleep near a material that remembers you. I don't need you to believe anything beyond the weight of a body in a seat and the way heat refuses to leave certain surfaces. The rest is noise I can't EQ out. Highways don't just take us someplace. They take something from us and give back something we didn't ask for. They are fair in the way weather is fair. It happens to everyone, but not in equal measure, and certainly not when we feel we deserve it. The stories I've told you aren't tidy, and they won't help you lock your doors better. They ask you to sit inside a thin band of night where life tilts 3 degrees and never quite levels again. If you're looking for closure, I don't have it. I can tell you that sometimes I stop the car at the edge of a bridge and listen to the thrum and count with it. Not to 5, not to 6, but just enough to feel the number you are at in your life settle in your chest. Some of us keep driving because we don't know what else to do with that count. Some of us pull over and learn to sit in a silence that isn't quiet, with the heater fan whispering and the lines sliding past and the knowledge that a sound can live in you after the engine dies. And if you hear the low hum long after you've parked, if you taste metal, if a slip of paper in your glove box refuses to forget a time you weren't present for, well, some sounds don't fade when the engine stops.